The entire saloon watched as a wealthy ranch owner slapped a helpless widow to the floor. Nobody dared move, until one quiet man slowly stood up, reached for his old sheriff's badge and changed the fate of an entire town forever. The first slap echoed louder than the piano. For one frozen heartbeat, every conversation inside the Dusty Trail saloon died. Poker chips stopped moving. Whiskey glasses hung halfway to waiting lips. Even the old piano player let his fingers fall away from the keys. Clara Bennett stumbled backward, her hat falling onto the dusty wooden floor. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Instead, she tightened her grip on the worn leather journal pressed against her chest as though it mattered more than the pain burning across her cheek. Across from her stood Victor Kane, the wealthiest ranch owner in Ash Hollow. His polished boots barely carried a speck of dust, and the silver watch hanging from his vest gleamed beneath the lantern light. Years of power had convinced him that no one in town would ever question him. "You've been warned twice," Victor said calmly, almost smiling. "Leave Ash Hollow before sunset." Clara slowly picked up her hat without taking her eyes off him. "I didn't come here to leave," she answered. "I came to prove my husband wasn't a thief." Several men quietly lowered their heads. Everyone knew Samuel Bennett had died 6 months earlier under mysterious circumstances while surveying land along Black Ridge. Officially, it had been ruled an accident. Unofficially, people whispered different stories whenever Victor Kane wasn't nearby. Victor stepped closer. "Dead men don't need land." "They don't," Clara replied. "But living liars do." The room became so quiet that someone could hear the wind pushing against the saloon windows. Victor's smile disappeared. Without warning, he shoved Clara backward. She crashed into a nearby table, sending cards and coins scattering across the floor. Still, nobody moved. The bartender stared into an empty glass as if polishing it had suddenly become the most important job in the world. 2 deputies standing near the entrance looked everywhere except toward Victor. Fear had lived in Ash Hollow for years. It simply wore different faces. Then, a chair scraped against the floor. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough for everyone to hear. Every eye turned toward the darkest corner of the saloon. An older man stood up. His gray coat looked faded by years beneath the western sun. A weathered leather gun belt rested low around his waist, though the revolver remained untouched. His face carried several old scars. Not the kind earned in bar fights. The kind earned surviving things most men never talked about. Elias Boone. Most newcomers knew him only as the quiet carpenter who repaired broken wagons outside town. Older residents remembered something else. Years ago, before corruption swallowed Ash Hollow, Elias Boone had worn the sheriff's badge. He walked forward with slow, measured steps. No anger. No hurry. Just certainty. Victor glanced toward him. "This doesn't concern you." Elias stopped a few feet away. "It concerns me the moment someone believes fear is stronger than the law." Victor laughed. "The law?" He looked toward the deputies. Neither man spoke. Neither moved. Victor spread his arms. "Looks like the law agrees with me." Elias nodded once. "No. They're simply afraid." The words landed harder than any punch. Victor's face tightened. "You planning to arrest me?" "I don't carry a badge anymore." "Then you're just an old man." "Maybe." Elias' voice stayed calm. "But even an old man knows the difference between justice and bullying." The silence stretched. Victor studied Elias carefully. Every person inside the saloon waited to see who would blink first. Finally, Victor leaned closer until only a few feet separated them. "You should mind your own business." "I tried. It keeps becoming my business." For several long seconds, neither man moved. Victor had hired gunmen. Money. Influence. Half the town in his pocket. But he also knew something everyone else remembered. Elias Boone had survived gunfights that became legends across 3 territories. He wasn't dangerous because he was fast. He was dangerous because he never acted unless he had already decided. Victor slowly stepped back. "This isn't over." "It rarely is," Elias answered. Victor adjusted his coat before turning toward the saloon doors. His 2 deputies hurried after him without saying a word. The heavy doors slammed shut behind them. Only then did the room breathe again. The bartender quietly picked up the broken glass. Card players returned to their table. Conversations restarted in careful whispers. As though nothing unusual had happened, Elias turned toward Clara. You hurt. She rubbed the red mark on her cheek. I've been worse. You always answer questions that way? She managed the smallest smile. Only honest ones. For the first time, Elias noticed the old leather journal tucked beneath her arm. Important. The most important thing I own. What is it? My husband's journal. She carefully opened the worn cover. Inside were neat sketches, survey maps, property lines, dates, measurements, and handwritten notes covering nearly every page. My husband discovered something before he died, Clara said quietly. He believed Victor Kane forged property records years ago. Elias frowned. That's a serious accusation. I know. She turned several pages. Samuel had marked dozens of locations with red pencil. Some entries ended abruptly as though he'd been interrupted. One page contained only 6 words. If anything happens, trust the maps. Elias stared at the handwriting. When did you find this? The morning after his funeral. And why come now? Because Judge Mercer arrives in 3 days. The only honest circuit judge left in this territory. She looked directly into Elias' eyes. If I can't prove the truth before he leaves. Victor Kane takes everything my husband died trying to protect. Elias remained silent. Outside, dark clouds slowly gathered above Ash Hollow. Inside, he had the uneasy feeling that Samuel Bennett hadn't simply uncovered stolen land. He had uncovered something powerful men would kill to keep buried. And before the week was over, the quiet little town was going to discover that the past had finally come back to collect its debt. Morning arrived with a cold wind sweeping through the empty streets of Ash Hollow. Most businesses had already opened their doors, but one building remained strangely quiet. The county records office. Clara stood outside its weathered entrance, the leather journal tucked safely beneath her coat. Beside her, Elias Boone leaned against the hitching post, quietly watching the street. You think he'll let us inside? Clara asked. Elias shook his head. No. Then why come? Because sometimes you learn more from a locked door than an open one. Just then the office door cracked open. An elderly clerk named Thomas Harlan stepped outside carrying a stack of folders. The moment he noticed Clara, his face turned pale. Without saying a word, he hurried back inside and locked the door. Clara sighed. He knows something. He does, Elias answered. The question is whether he's frightened of the truth, or frightened of Victor Kane. Instead of pounding on the door, Elias walked around the side of the building. There. Clara followed his gaze. A narrow basement window had been left slightly open. Not large enough for a person, but large enough to hear voices. They quietly moved closer. Inside 2 men were arguing. You should have burned the old survey books years ago, one voice whispered. And leave evidence that records disappeared, the other replied nervously. Victor Kane's voice answered with cold certainty. I don't care how you fix it. Judge Mercer arrives tomorrow. If those original maps are found, everything falls apart. Clara's heart pounded. She carefully opened Samuel's journal. Several page numbers matched the file numbers the men inside had just mentioned. Her husband had known. He had known exactly where the missing records belonged. The voices stopped. Footsteps approached. Elias gently pulled Clara away from the window seconds before the door opened. Victor Kane stepped outside, adjusting his gloves. His sharp eyes landed on Clara. So, you still haven't learned when to quit. Clara calmly met his stare. I only quit when I'm wrong. Victor smiled. Then you'll never quit. He climbed onto his horse and rode away without another word. But before disappearing down the street, he quietly nodded toward 2 rough-looking riders waiting near the blacksmith's shop. Elias noticed. So did Clara. They're following us. I know. Should we run? Elias smiled faintly. I spent 15 years chasing men who expected people to run. Instead of heading toward the saloon, Elias led Clara through narrow alleys until they reached the old sheriff's office. The building had been abandoned for years. Dust covered every window. Inside, broken furniture sat exactly where it had been left. Clara looked around. You kept the key? I never threw it away. Elias walked toward an old iron filing cabinet tucked beneath the stairs. After several attempts, the rusty drawer finally slid open. Inside rested dozens of forgotten reports. Old arrest records. Property disputes. Survey requests. Most meant nothing. Then Clara noticed one folded envelope hidden beneath the bottom drawer. Across the front someone had written only 3 words. Open if needed. The handwriting wasn't Elias's nor was it Samuel Bennett's. Carefully, Clara unfolded the letter. It had been written nearly 10 years earlier by the former county surveyor. If anyone is reading this, the official maps can no longer be trusted. I made duplicate copies after discovering several boundary lines had been changed under political pressure. The originals were hidden where no one would think to search. Below the message was a rough hand-drawn sketch. It wasn't a treasure map. It showed the old church cemetery. One grave had been marked with a small black X. Clara looked at Elias. Samuel never mentioned this. He probably never found the letter. Without wasting another minute, they headed toward the cemetery on the northern hill. The place had long since fallen into silence. Weathered wooden crosses leaned sideways. Wild grass covered most of the older graves. Using the sketch, Clara counted rows carefully. 5 from the gate. 3 from the oak tree. There. The marked grave belonged to a man named Henry Collins, a surveyor who had died nearly 20 years earlier. Behind the headstone, hidden beneath loose rocks, Elias found a small rusted metal box. Its lock had nearly disappeared beneath layers of rust. Using the butt of his revolver, Elias broke it open. Inside were rolled survey maps wrapped carefully in oilcloth. The paper remained perfectly dry. Clara carefully spread one map across the grass. Within seconds she saw the difference. The official county map showed Victor Kane owning nearly 500 additional acres. This original survey proved those acres legally belonged to 6 different farming families, including Samuel Bennett's land. Clara could barely breathe. This changes everything. It changes enough, Elias corrected. We still have to prove these maps are genuine. As they rolled, the documents closed again. The sound of galloping horses echoed across the hill. 3 riders appeared at the cemetery gate. Victor Kane's hired men. One of them pointed directly toward Clara. There they are. Elias immediately grabbed the metal box. Go. The 2 of them ran between the old gravestones while bullets struck nearby fence posts, sending splinters flying into the air. Clara clutched Samuel's journal against her chest with one hand while carrying the recovered maps with the other. She wasn't running from fear anymore. She was running toward the truth. At the edge of the cemetery stood Grace Miller beside her wagon. Without asking questions, she threw open the back cover. Get in. Clara climbed inside. Elias jumped onto the driver's seat. Grace snapped the reins. The horses surged forward just as another shot echoed behind them. The wagon disappeared down the winding canyon road, leaving only dust behind. Inside the wagon, Clara carefully unrolled the original survey maps once more. For the first time since arriving in Ash Hollow, she wasn't holding suspicion. She was holding proof. And somewhere behind them, Victor Kane had just realized something that terrified him more than any sheriff's badge. The widow he thought he could silence had found the evidence that could destroy everything he had built.